Super. Once we have the recording, we can create a transcript from that.
Well, I have captions turned on, so
Just
Okay,
make sure that gets recorded. Yeah, perfect.
I can grab the transcript afterwards.
that is very helpful because then I only have to take notes about the obvious things instead of uh, all of the terms and everything.
Right. I appreciate that because let me go back in 1980. By 1980, after almost 2 years at San Jose State, I've been working on various archaeological sites around the Greater Bay Area. And I heard of the term Ohlone. And these two students brought this woman to my office at the university, Rosemary Canberra. And she says, I'm an Ohlone Indian. And I told her, well, I don't know anything about you guys, but I'm willing to learn. And I said, what else are you called? Maybe in the literature, she said Costanoan, which is how the Bureau of Indian Affairs classifies the language group from the San Francisco to Monterey Bay area. So I took her to the library, the old Walquist library, which had no computers, but sliding oak drawers with index cards. And we tracked down Costanoan and said, Costanoan, see Ohlone. And then we went over to Ohlone and says, Ohlone, see Costanoan.
Right.
And we found the quintessential authority, the tome, the publication of the Handbook for the California Indians that was written by Alfred Kroeber,
Okay.
published in 1925. Kroeber came out of Columbia University with Margaret Mead and others, students of Boas, but he was one of the founding anthropologists at Cal Berkeley. And he interviewed the elders of the Pleasanton Niles Rancheria. And what he wrote when we went through his chapter on Costanoan, he said, the Costanoan group is extinct for all practical purposes are concerned. And a few individuals survive whose ancestors were once attached to missions San Jose, Mission San Juan Bautista, and Mission San Carlos. And they live lost amongst other Indians or obscure Mexicans, completely dismissed their existence, even though he recorded their language. So I looked at Rosemary and I said, well, Kroeber's the pinnacle authority on, you guys, and says you're extinct by 1925. And she put her hands on her hips and she says, I beg to differ with you and Dr. Kroeber. I am an Ohlone Indian. My mother's an Ohlone Indian. She was born on the Sonol Rancheria, which is up by the Ohlone Wilderness area. In 1911, and she was baptized at Mission San Jose in 1912, along with other members of the family and the tribe, were continuously being baptized at Mission San Jose as Indians till 1920. And then I was told when her mother died in 1921, the girls were sent off to St. Joseph's Mission Orphanage at Mission San Jose. And the family members languished there as half orphans till 1930. So we pulled out those documents and I asked her, what do you want me to do? She says, we know who our parents are. Some of us know who our grandparents were. We'd like you to help us go through the mission records and pull back our families as far back as we could go with the different lineages scattered throughout the Bay Area and some living in the Interior Valley. And so I was embarking upon this process of interviewing them. And we also trained them to do archaeology as well, because archaeologists would not allow these Indians to be on their ancestral heritage sites. So what formulated with me and the Muwekma leadership, the elders, was that this is a prime example of the politics of erasure. Kroeber's extinction sentence of 1925, And then we demonstrated how anthropologists and academics in geography, in history, archaeology, and anthropology goose-stepped behind his sentence of extinction. And as I'm interviewing the families, they're showing me their Bureau of Indian Affairs cards. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Yeah, we enrolled with the Bureau of Indian Affairs." I said, "What was that about?" Now remember, I'm naive here. And she said, "Oh, yeah, we got Indian money." Indian money? And I said, "What was that for?" He says, "Oh, yeah, in the 1920s and 30s, our families enrolled with the Bureau of Indian Affairs under the Claims Settlement Act. And again in the 1940s and 50s, and again in 68 to 71. So on the one hand, if Kroger says they're extinct, how can they enroll and be approved by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Secretary of the Interior, and the federal courts as California Indians from Mission San Jose? So during the 1950s hearings in San Francisco and Berkeley, Kroger and the anthropologists from Cal Berkeley argued on behalf of the California Indians, including the Muwekmas from Pleasanton and Niles, that they were still full-bloods. And this was published by Berkeley, that they were still full-bloods, but the kind of information that anthropologists want from them, they can't get. So they really mean that those systems or knowledge is extinct. But they were still full-bloods, enrolling with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then I found out that when we were excavating a site along Highway 101, where 85 comes into 101 in the 90s, the archaeological firm said there was nothing there. And the county gave the tribe a parallel contract to survey, to monitor the heavy equipment excavating the area that was a riparian landfill, or riparian restoration basin. And as we were working there, we found 102 burials dating around 2,000 years old. While the archaeologists argued there was nothing there. So you have to understand the dichotomy between the dominant society and their specialists, those cultural brokers who supposedly know more than anybody else about Indians of California or Indians elsewhere, and the reality that the tribe is confronted by. So as I'm working there and we're excavating burials, we have several World War II veterans excavating the burials. One served in the 101st Airborne Division. Hank Alvarez just died at the age of 100 years old. He was born 1922. He died 2022. And his cousin was Robert Sanchez, was in the 82nd Airborne Division and the 508th Paratrooper Division. So as we're doing this, I'm reflecting back on when we went to History San Jose in 1980 with one of their board of directors, Austin Warburton. Warburton Circle in Santa Clara, the Civic Center, is named after his father, famous doctor, and he became a famous lawyer at Santa Clara University. So we went to History San Jose and we noticed that there were all these ethnic groups that are represented there through History San Jose. And we asked, can we do an exhibit on the history and heritage of the Muwek Ohlone? This is 1980 now, backtracking. And the response was no, for two reasons. No one is interested in the Indians, and the Indians have nothing to do with the American experience. So as I'm working with these World War II veterans, I decided to interview them and start writing their military history. And as I was interviewing them, they were telling me about their relations who served during World War I. 8 men, Muwekma men, served in the Army, Navy, and the Marine Corps. 4 of them are buried at Golden Gate National Cemetery. National parks don't want to hear anything about these guys. I'll tell you about that later on. Another one is buried at Golden Gate, at Riverside. And when they came back from World War I, combat veterans, they were still not U.S. citizens. So California Indians and Indians in the United States don't become citizens of the United States until after 1924, when the Citizen Act was passed. And I assumed that because around 17,000 American Indians served overseas during World War I, that was one of the linchpins for citizenship. Well, I was kind of right, but not entirely. So recently you heard about the Killers of the Flower Moon, about the Osage. The Osage bought their own reservation in Oklahoma. It was the richest place in the United States because of the oil. And they had no authority over their own lives, their finances, the ownership. So white people were systematically killing them and claiming executive heirship over their lands. They went to see President Calvin Coolidge in Congress, and it was through their efforts, essentially, citizenship was passed. And remember, women got the right to vote in 1920, but not Native American women. So there's all this dynamic going on. So as I'm interviewing these World War II veterans, I'm starting to map out their service in the United States Armed Forces. And some of them go on to Korea. So they serve in Vietnam, in Desert Storm, in Iraq, and are still serving today. And when we went back to Washington, D.C., after we submitted 6 linear feet of documentation, some of it you've been exposed to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, we demonstrated that the Muwekma tribe was previously federally recognized as the Verona Band of Alameda County. And the linchpin there was they were never terminated by any act of Congress. Only Congress has the authority to terminate a tribe's status. So when we used the term terminated, the Bureau corrected us. They said, no, tribe was never terminated. So we asked them, so how did the tribe legally lose their recognition? The first comment was, we decided that we didn't want to deal with the tribe anymore. And we asked, how is that a legal process? And they refused to answer. So as we're preparing our documentation from 1900 to 1998, when we'd submitted everything in, we noticed that they accepted for other tribes that if your kids went to Indian boarding school, that was a form of recognition. So we found several of the kids. In the 1930s, one kid was too dark to go to school in the Bay Area. So they shipped him off in 1930 or 31 to Sherman Institute in Riverside. In the 1940s, 2 of the kids, the Guzman kids, went up to Chemawa, Salem, Oregon, for Indian boarding school there. So on the one hand, again, going back to Kroger's extinction sentence, if you are extinct, how can you go to Indian boarding school? And then the Bureau turns around and says, you cannot use as evidence your enrollments with the Bureau of Indian Affairs from 28 to 32, 48 to 57, 68 to 71, with the fact that kids went to Indian boarding school as evidence that you're Indian. So I asked them in DC, what kids went to Indian boarding school? White kids? So you're dealing with a wall of stupidity. And even though some of them are Indians, they have an agenda. Okay? And one of the ones who was, I don't know if he was Potawatomi or not, was a solicitor named Scott Keep, who was appointed by President Nixon in 1973. And we gave papers at Kellogg University in DC about the survivorship and the struggle for tribes to regain their federal recognition. Scott Keep gave a position as the head solicitor for the Interior Department that he was there to protect the United States of America from American Indians. And I kind of said to people nearby me, said, but who are they, Al-Qaeda? Kind of protection. So the invisible warfare that no one sees, because the way that the media focuses on themes, whether it's corruption at a casino or greed at a casino or murder on the reservation, this is something that no one sees. As an anthropologist, my role was to give voice, to lend voice in terms of publications of the studies with all the primary documentation. So in May 24th, 1996, the Muwekmas obtained a formal determination of previous federal recognition under, as if you guys should know about this as well as Indians, under 25 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 83.8. As if Indians are supposed to know this stuff, right? But we pulled it off. They got a formal letter from the Office of Tribal Operations. They were federally recognized and never terminated. So then they said, submit all your other evidence and we'll put you on a review list called Ready Status for Active Consideration, 1998. So when we calculated that it would take the Bureau of Indian Affairs around 24 years before they could look at the tribe's documentation as the only previously federally recognized tribe on the list of tribes petitioning the Bureau, the tribe sued in federal court. And under the federal court, under Justice Urbina in 1999, he slammed Interior for being disingenuous. And he insisted on moving the Muwekmas way up ahead of the queue because of that status of previous recognition. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs became pissed, especially the Office of Federal Acknowledgement. No one tells them what to do because it was their fiefdom. And at the head of their fiefdom, the solicitor, Scott Keep, was also making sure that the Muwekmas would suffer. So during the court hearings, the Bureau of Indian Affairs asked an intelligent and reasonable question. And the question was, how are all 550 members of the tribe descendant from the previously federally recognized tribe that was still recognized up until 1927, when Dorrington, out of the Sacramento superintendent, who was a drunk, decided to remove 135 tribes who were landless from being eligible for land purchase. So we had to put together all the folders, make sure all the enrollments were together, their enrollment applications, birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, mission records. And we were able to demonstrate that, and they agreed, that 100% of the enrolled members are either living members of the Verona Band of Alameda County, who were born before June 23rd, 1927, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of members who comprised the Verona Band. So then the Bureau was forced to do an expedited review. And because they were forced, they decided to become vindictive. So let me just map out something to you. if you look at a triangle, a pyramid, at the top of decision making is the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, a political appointee. At that time, the political appointee under the Bush administration was a guy named Neil McCaleb. And during his Senate hearings, he said, yes, I am a descendant of the Choctaw Indians of Oklahoma. I am an architect, but I know nothing about Indian affairs. Nothing. And the Republicans say, you're our man. So they made him the assistant secretary. He then said that I will rubber stamp anything my staff send to me. So at the two ends of the triangle, you have the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, also known as the Branch of Acknowledgement and Research, and the tribe that's petitioning. These guys, the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, does their evaluation and report back to the Assistant Secretary. And even though the information was so corrupted and so slanted, where they rejected all the evidence that was submitted by the tribe, the Muwekmas have no, or any other tribe, have no avenue to counter-challenge or speak to the Assistant Secretary for alternative consideration. So when people say, in this case, government systems are corrupt, in Indian affairs, it is a nightmare. So I got my education, they say baptized in fire. Now, at 1980, I was also the faculty advisor for the Native American students on campus. I met a Lakota Sioux man named Hank LeBeau, and he took me and invited me to go up to DQU, which was up by Davis, to go on a 500-mile American Indian spiritual run. 5 days, 500 miles. So we took the team from San Jose State and other neighborhoods around the greater San Jose area on the 500-mile run. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because it's a spiritual run. And of course, I have no Native American blood in me. People ask me what tribe I am. I tell them I'm Mishpocha. I don't know if you know what Mishpocha refers to. But in Jewish tradition, you ask someone if they're Jewish by saying, are you Mishpocha? Are you of the tribe of Israel? And so I joke that I'm Mishpocha. Anyway, and so I also acquired a sense of dedication that if these tribal families, not only for this tribe, but other tribes I've been working with around the state, are running for their lives, I will run along with them and not give up. And that's why I've been at it for 44 years. Even though I was allowed to retire and I became a parasite of the state.
So I have a question.
Please.
We had a question about when the Muwekmas were applying for recognition as a tribe. What territory were they encompassing for their tribe? We've heard that, seen maps that says it's 23 counties or something, and we don't understand where that came from. And our concerns were, how does this affect other tribes in the area, like the Amano Nutsen and the Sagarate and those other tribes?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'm going back just a second.
Okay.
In 1992, when we worked with the Aboriginal Nations of California, with Senator Inouye and Congressman George Miller from Pleasant Hill, we put together a federal recognition bill, which was hijacked by the Papa Bush administration to create the Advisory Council on California Indian Policy. The bill was HR 2144. And the thing was, the object was they wanted to say, do California Indians have any needs? kind of water it down. So if Bush was reelected, it would never have been funded. And Clinton was elected, and it took him 2 years to gain control over the Interior Department because of the slash and burn policies of the Republicans. So we were able to put together, it was funding of $800,000 that was allocated with the help of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Sacramento and California Indian Legal Services. I was charged to put together a map of California. So I contacted the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Sacramento. I asked them for a jurisdictional map. They said none existed. So I had to create a map for the federal government so that we could hold elections for set representatives from 7 recognized tribes, 7 unrecognized tribes, and 2 terminated tribes. Now, let me stop at that point. Are you aware of a fellow's name, Dylan S. Meyer? Ring a bell to you?
No.
He was the director of the Japanese American internment camps. And for doing such a good job in dealing with the Japanese Americans, his next assignment, he becomes Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And his job was to terminate every single tribe of the United States. In the late 40s and 50s, so 42 or 46 tribes in California were terminated. And the Menominees of Wisconsin by Green Bay and the Klamath up in Oregon, these are tribes that were terminated. There are many others, but so anyway, so we were trying to deal with aspects of the terminated tribes as well. And we held elections I divided the state up into 7 districts based upon historic, linguistic, cultural kind of records. And for the coastal regime from Marin County down to San Luis Obispo was the coastal regime there. A woman named Stephanie Escobar from Estolin Nation was elected to represent on the advisory council. The acting director at the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Sacramento overthrew the election and put her friend on there from Kern County. So there was already tampering with elections. And we had to persevere. And out of $800,000, only $25,000 was spent for holding hearings around the state on federal recognition issues and tribes that were previously recognized. So my job also was to work with the various people who claim to be representing these areas of California to work on their genealogy and their evidence of their previous recognition. Okay. So when we held hearings, people like Karina Gould, who is a Guzman, her uncle and aunt and first cousins are all enrolled in the Moek-Maloney tribe. She had the opportunity to enroll. She decided she wanted her own power brokerage. So she was able to finagle Segorte. And it did not exist what she claims to be the chairwoman of the Confederated Villages of Lisjan, which is a term that was in the linguistic record. It didn't exist prior to 2018. And it's only her and her family.
So that was Segurite.
Say again?
That was Segurite that you just
Yes, and that was her nonprofit. Because originally she was with the Shell Mound Walkers. And my particular study, my thesis, was a study on Coyote Hills and the mounds that are out there. And I demonstrated those mounds are not shell mounds. Those mounds are mortuary mounds where the nobility and fallen warriors, the wealthy elite, were buried in those mounds because it was the interface between land and water, which is part of their symbolic moiety system. Moiety just means halves. Anyway, So I published that in 1993. On the Ama Mutsun tribe. So we started to organize Muwekma in 1980. And in order to gain federal recognition or regain federal recognition, tribes have to organize themselves under the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. Have a constitution, a government, tribal council, a enrollment ordinance, and bylaws. And so when we met up with some of the Ama people in 1989, they invited myself and the Muwekmas to come down. We met with the elders, and we also, I was charged by them not only to do archaeology with them, but to organize their Bureau of Indian Affairs documentation. So they were federally recognized at the same time as the Muwekmas, with the Muwekmas being the Verona Band of Alameda County. The land was purchased by Phoebe Apperson Hearst and a husband who was a U.S. Senator, George Hearst. They bought 1,900 acres of the East Bay, including the tribe's Ali Sal Rancheria outside of Pleasanton. And it's Phoebe Hearst, as a friendly rival of the Stanfords, funded the anthropology department at Berkeley at the turn of the century. And it is she who invited Kroeber to come out to interview the Indians. And then Kroeber, along with his colleagues, continued to visit the Muwekmas. Later on, the Ama Mutsun were called the San Juan Bautista Band of San Benito County. And the Esselins were called the Monterey Band of Monterey County. And we organized them in 1992. And we saw that the same evidence we used for the Muwekma. And their elders from both of those other tribes were also the linguistic consultants to Kroeber, the anthropologists at Berkeley, and the anthropologist linguists from the Bureau of American Ethnology. And the last of those brilliant linguists was John Peabody Harrington, who worked with the tribal communities from 1925 to 1939, when the last of those families died, those elders died. And then, of course, when there were no longer a language to secure, no one was interested in them. Kroeber dismissed any more work to be done with these tribes. Anyway, so the Muwekma's territory, based on linguistic intermarriage and placement within the 3 Bay Area missions, includes San Francisco County, San Mateo County, parts of Santa Cruz County, most of Santa Clara County, Alameda County, and Contra Costa County, with some extensions going into the delta of San Joaquin County. So based upon those linguistic, cultural, intermarriage ties, and missionization, they formed what was now reconsidered the San Francisco Bay Costanoan speaking tribal area. In 1969, Professor Jack Forbes from UC Davis published his book called The Indians or the Native Americans of California and Nevada. And he uses the linguistic information with the northern division he calls Muwekma. And the southern division he refers to as Mutsun. And there's other documentation in the 19th century that distinguished the Bay Area languages and and tribal cultures from the Ama Mutsun. It was, what's his name? The History of San Jose in 1878. I think it's Ittel who wrote that there's the language of the Alchones was similar to, but different from the Mutsuns from San Juan Bautista. And it was reflecting earlier studies as well. Anyway, so when we submitted the information to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and to the Advisory Council on California Indian Policy, Congressman George Miller embraced that narrative with those counties, and they were placed in the California Status Clarification Act of the year 2000 as a result of the ACCIP, the Advisory Council of California Indian Policy's final analyses of the evidence. And that's, I think I might have sent you a copy of Miller's recognition, Bill. If not, I'm more than happy to send it to you. But the Democrats who were in power then, the argument with the liberal Democrats was you don't want to get dirty in Indian affairs. So the Democrats would not allow it to come out of committee, that bill. That would have restored Muwekma, along with 5 or 6 other tribes that are mentioned there. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
You sounded like you're about to complete a thought, so please state your conclusion there, because then I have a question.
Just simply that from transforming or crossing over a cultural threshold and looking through the worldview of Native peoples,
yeah,
Democrats and Republicans are no different in terms of the body politic. Although I got to admit, Democrats tend to be more progressive than Republicans. But from a Native point of view, it still represents a colonial system and the politics of erasure.
Yeah, to be honest, I wasn't able to follow all of what you just said. But one of the articles that I read that you sent us was really, really fascinating. And catch me if I'm right, I'm going to ramble for a little bit here. The impression I got was that in California, for many fascinating reasons, the indigenous paradigm of social organization was profoundly different than the European model, whether it was the Spanish or English or whatever it might be. So profoundly different that the Europeans their brains exploded. They didn't know what to do with it. That's Terry's interpretation. And so the colonizers decimated what existed, because in California in particular, the organization was very, very different than what they had even seen elsewhere. And
yes and no. I mean,
okay.
By the time the Spanish come into Alta California in 1769, their model of control and disruption via the mission system was well established. Let me just say another.
But there was going to be go ahead. There was going to be a question coming, but I just lost it. So go for it.
So we have revised, meaning the anthropological community, as early as 1966 with a fellow named Dobbins, who was a historical demographer. He recalculated the estimated population of California at the time of Spanish contact to be around 1 million to 1.5 million people. What we do know by fact is by the 1920s, there are less than 20,000 of them left alive. With that recalculation, we estimate that the Muwekmas, their ancestors, numbered around 30,000 people. And there were 62 people left alive when they enrolled in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So decimation psychological trauma, disenfranchisement, marginalization. These are all factors. And then the only way that they really could survive, the Indian women at times, was to marry outside the community. And when they married non-Indian men who could have stable jobs and offer stable households, this is in the late 19th century and then 20th century. It was one of the survival strategies that not only the Moeckers employed, but other California Indians as well.
So I think I have a question.
Please.
I don't remember what year you said it was, but there was a time when it fell to you, and give me a while to get the question out.
Please.
There was a time when it fell to you to draw up the map of territories of the native peoples. And what I think I heard you say was at the time you were considering 7 recognized tribes, 7 unrecognized tribes, and 2 terminated tribes. And I think I heard you say that based on your best understanding, you divided the state of California into seven sections, and then there was going to be a process of hearings and calibration that kind of went to crap for political reasons. Terry's interpretation. So that's kind of how it all. I mean that part I followed, and I'm just what I'm trying to get my brain around is if the indigenous population's view of social organization was so different, like I got the idea that language was part of it, but intermarriage made for a really broad network of relationships. I guess what is considered the appropriate way to identify what is a tribe? Is it genealogy? Is it linguistics patterns? What made this be 7 recognized, 7 unrecognized, and 2 terminated? How do you get 16 groupings out of that?
That was a charge in the ACCIP legislation in HR 2144, where they said that there should be elections in California with the representation being 7 recognized tribes, 7 unrecognized tribes, and 2 from terminated tribes. So I had to do a lot of research and find out which tribes of those categories were available to submit into the ring for an election to be represented. And because the number was 7, it wasn't that difficult to divide the state up into 7 meaningful districts so it could accommodate these people to be elected. And so without issue, I was put together my map. And obviously, I was consulting other people as well. And that did not become controversial, but that was in order so that the ACCIP could proceed in holding hearings around the state with an elected body representing those tribes. You asked another important question about what constitutes a tribe. And that's a good point. Part of the definition of a tribe comes from all the legal proceedings that are embodied in the United States Government Code of Federal Regulations. So there are entities such as treaty tribes, tribes that sign on treaties, and that their descendants are either still federally recognized or were eventually let go by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Part of that process includes evidence of continual existence. So there are 7 mandatory criteria that the federal government uses. One is continuous identification by external means of a tribe, demonstration and evidence of a community interacting with each other, evidence of political authority, executive formal and or informal evidence, which we provided to the Bureau. The other ones are more kind of governmental administrative stuff, and also genealogical is one of the, is E, descent from a historic tribe. So descent from a historic tribe means that there is a continuously existing community. Now, let me backtrack for a second here. I didn't provide this information, but I did provide it to you in the publications. In 1906, in San Jose, was a man named Charles E. Kelsey, who was a lawyer. He was the secretary for a philanthropic group called the Northern California Indian Association, concerned about the dying Indians of California. And they came out of the conferences out of New York State, the influence of it. So he and his colleagues put together what they called a memorial and what they call the schedule, which is like a census. It shows places where Indian communities were or are at the time and their estimated number, even if they're landless within the surrounding community. And he went back to the 58th Congress in 1905, and he submitted that to Congress. When he was back there, there was a clerk who was interested in what he was pursuing, pointed out that sealed under secrecy in the Senate archives was a packet labeled California. Nobody knew what was there, and no one had access to it because it was under seal of secrecy. They went to the Senate voted to remove the seal of secrecy, and what they found freaked out the United States Congress, the Senate. They found the 18 unratified treaties of California. So the only legal mechanism or instrument that the federal government had to take land from Indian tribes and quiet their Aboriginal title was through treaty. So 389 treaties were negotiated between 1778, beginning with the Delaware, back east during the Revolution, and it's either 1868 or 1872, the Sioux treaties of Fort Laramie. Out of those 389 treaties, 18 of those treaties were the California Indian treaties. So Congress passed a $100,000 appropriation, and President Millard Fillmore selected 3 commissioners to come to California to treat with the California Indians to give up their land. And because remember, the gold rush is full blown in 1851, 1852. And there's a lot of warfare going on and murder. So they come out. It was McKee, Barber, and I'll get the other one come to me. Commissioners. They divided the state up into 18 districts. They met with tribes, mostly in the interior and the Sierra. And in those treaties, 8.5 million acres of land was to be set aside for the tribes. When the treaties came back from California in 1852, the newly elected senators from California argued that Indians should get nothing. So the warfare continued, the murder continued, and the treaties were sealed under secrecy. No one was to know that the United States government recognized the ownership of California under the Tribes of California. So, freaking out when they found the treaties, they named Kelsey Special Indian Agent in 1905. He was charged in less than a year to do a specific census, a Special Indian Census of 1905-06 for Northern California. Northern California was Los Angeles to the Oregon border. There were no highways, so he had his work cut out for him. So he included in his censuses around the Bay Area, because he was called back to DC, part of the Muwekmas at Pleasanton and Niles. And he included the Amamutsun, but it was based upon the 1900 federal Indian census. And the people from Monterey he included at the Sur Rancheria, south of Carmel. So the point is that he placed them under his direct jurisdiction, under the Indian Service Bureau, the old BIA, and they became eligible along with several hundred, or at least around 200 other tribes that were landless, for land purchases. And what we found in the National Archives are all of the correspondences that demonstrate that every Indian, even Kevin Starr Jordan, the president of Stanford University in 1908, was involved in this. So they started to appropriate monies under the Homeless Indian Act, California Homeless Indian Act of 1906, 1908, all the way through 1937 to purchase land for the landless and homeless Indians so they could have small plots of land to establish homes, gardens. The problem was that Kelsey and his later colleagues, John Terrell and Asbury, found is that white people did not want Indians to live near them. They offered to sell land that was useless, had no water on it, was rocky, had no way to create gardens. So the frustrations was very high. When Kelsey retired in 1913, he was $18,000 in debt out of his own pocket, trying to buy land for Indians. This was no easy chore. So under the correspondences, the Muwekmas and the Amamutsun, as the previous names, fell under the jurisdiction, first under the Indian Service Bureau in general, then the Reno Agency, shifted all the way to Reno. So if you do a radar sweep to the coast of California, we're on the margins. And these superintendents at the Reno Agency had Nevada to deal with and all the other landed tribes up in the Sierra and the foothills. But they're listed as landless non-reservation tribes. By 1917, there was a guy named Lafayette A. Dorrington. Dorrington was a drunk. And how do we know he was a drunk? Because we have from the National Archives that he was under investigation continuously for dereliction of duty. And Congress kept on contacting him, or the Commission of Indian Affairs, asking him to list by county all of the tribes and bands under the Sacramento jurisdiction that have yet to receive land, so Congress can plan for the appropriations. Future appropriation, buy more land. So what had happened, he finally responds on June 23rd, 1927, with a report, mostly written by his clerk, dictated by him, where he would remove 135 tribal communities that were landless, in need of land. And what he wrote in that report, listed by alphabetical order, Alameda County, he said there was one tribe in Alameda County, commonly called the Verona Band. So he recognized that. And he said, these are Indians that live near the town of Verona. There's never been a town of Verona in Alameda County. So we knew he never visited them. And he said, it does not appear at the present time that there is a need to purchase land for this tribe. For the Amamotsun, he says, this is a tribe, although landless, that was well cared for by the Catholic priests. There's no need to purchase land for them. So he removed 135 tribes total. I mean, landless. They were destitute, okay? Starving. Anyway, so what we found out is that the Commission of Indian Affairs is still contacting him by 1929. And he writes back, he says, it's been my personal opinion and belief we should not be buying land for California Indians. Take the appropriations and send it somewhere else. By 1931, he was either removed, fired. Anyway, he's out of the scene. And the new kind of superintendent is a kind of good guy named Oscar Lips, who wrote about the gross negligence and crass indifference by the Bureau of Indian Affairs toward the California Indian tribes. So what we also learn is one of the reasons why Dorrington, not explicitly spelled out, is that 1926, Congress was gearing up to terminate every single tribe of California. They wanted the Indian Affairs to get out of the Indian business and shirk their fiduciary responsibility. So in that proposal of the California Indian Jurisdictional Act of 1928, he was gearing up for it. If there was a monetary settlement, the settlement would not go to tribes. The settlement, the monies would go to the state of California for them to administer all the programs for health, agriculture, water, housing, etc., but only for tribes that have land. So he removed 135 tribes so they would not be a burden on the taxpayer. Anyway, so the Muwekmas enroll with the Bureau of Indian Affairs from 28 to 32 and are approved by the Secretary of the Interior. Many of them are full-bloods. And by the 1950s, there's a settlement. The hearings were at Berkeley and San Francisco with Grover and his colleagues that argued about the sociocultural complexity of California Indians as landholders, owning land. Because the Justice Department said that the Indians should get nothing because they ate a hand-to-mouth existence and just roamed all over the place. Tribelets, which was a discourtesy to the, I think Kroger and his colleagues argued. So for the value of 8.5 million acres of land to Central California, a just settlement for each surviving head of household that enrolled from 28 to 32, with interest back to 1852, $150 was paid for the value of 8.5 million acres of land. Under the Jurisdictional Act, they were not allowed to have lawyers in the federal courts. The Bureau of Indian Affairs would represent their interests. So in 1971, for the third Bureau of Indian Affairs enrollments, 68 to 71, there was a settlement for the value of 64,425,000 acres of land, the rest of California, with interest back to 1852. And the settlement was for each eligible person $668.61 for the value of California. And the court said, you're Indians, you never lost your land, but because you're Indians, you can't have land. What we're going to do is make you rich. Here's $668. You're rich now, 1971. Many of the tribal people I've interviewed never cashed their checks.
Oh, boy.
So no one sees this. It's, by the way, been published throughout various books like the Handbook of California Indians, Handbook of American Indians, California, Volume 8, 1978, for example. So details of that is imbued within the Smithsonian Institution's publications. So it's not like I'm making any of this stuff up.
Right.
No one sees it. I'm sorry, please.
I'm wondering, so this is this is a pretty ghastly story of colonialism and systemic erasure. And I'm just wondering that, in 2019, California officially apologized to the indigenous communities for the genocide that had taken place. Did that have any impact or effect on this stalemate being, where people's recognized status is held hostage in the Bureau of Indian Affairs?
Absolutely not. Words are just fleeting.
Hmm.
They're not translated into meaningful policies.
But nobody held them accountable for that. Like, I mean, I would imagine people were listening, tribes were listening, leaders of those tribes were listening. And, when somebody says, we apologize for the genocide, then somebody really has to stand up and say, and so what?
Exactly. And the question is, what avenues are open for those tribal members or representatives to say, so what?
Hmm.
The media doesn't really carry this kind of in-depth interview because on the native side, it's not controversial
Hmm.
enough to sell.
Hmm.
And that's why what my role with my colleagues from Santa Clara University, Stanford University, and elsewhere, we are continuously publishing not only what we find archaeologically in the interpretations, but we don't put the tribal leadership in just the acknowledgments and say, the end. We want to thank these people for digging up their ancestral remains. Thank you, the end. They're co-authors
Hmm.
on those archaeological reports and other publications, and the intellectual property belongs to them.
Hmm.
Because under the old colonial system, I'm Mr. Anthropologist. I could go out to a reservation, milk the information from all these good people, and then people would proclaim me as the authority on those people, and I would have no further relationship or responsibilities to that community.
Right. And that's why you said much early on about the tribal leaders is that you turned them into anthropologists.
Well, we basically train them to do their own archaeology.
Uh,
And so that rather than them watching as monitors or having one person, we had several generations of family working from, like I said, World War II veterans and the elders all the way to the kids. Not only that, when we did the site in Morgan Hill, which an archaeologist destroyed essentially by telling the developer there was nothing there, the developer contacted the Muwekmas. We went out there, found all these artifacts strewn over on the housing pads. So we put together a program where we invited high school kids, junior high school kids, this is the tribe telling me, and their families to come out on the weekends to help excavate. Even kids that are at Highway 101 and 85, when we did Kapan Unikma, the Three Wolves site, we had teachers asking if their special ed kids, these like fifth graders, thereabout, could come out to the site. And not only did the tribe say yes, on the day when the heavy equipment wasn't rolling by, we got the kids screens and shovels, pardon me, and they worked on non-critical features, subsurface features that weren't burials, but they had a blast, excavating, screening, and pulling out artifacts.
Interesting.
So the question the tribe is interested in is how has the general public benefited
Mhm.
from over $500 million in archaeology in Santa Clara County alone, least alone Alameda County, when these archaeologists do nothing other than put their kids through private schools because they see burials, they see dollar signs.
Mm.
And what the tribe does is we've worked on exhibits at the Oakland Museum, the Los Gatos Museum, Campbell's Historical Museum, Los Altos Museum, and now with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission over in Sonoma at their new watershed exhibit. They were living right there at the turn of the 20th century.
Right.
And they bought into it. So we're trying to educate the public and at the same time talk about they're Indianizing these processes by talking about mutual benefits and reciprocity. It does not have to do with money. So the scientific community has benefited by linking up with these scholars, because the budgets are not there for the tribe, to do ancient and modern DNA like we did in the studies in Sonoma, for example.
Well, so there are tribal leaders right now who, as you probably know, are embarking on the Trail of Tears or Trail of Truth to Washington, D.C. For just that reason, to try and influence the public or create enough awareness of this and maybe get some political momentum on their side. What can you say about that?
I'll tell you how that came about. Working with the state legislature, that they read the documentation, the history, the primary evidence, including the military history of the tribe. And so they were putting together legislation to call upon the congressional representatives of California to support and advocate for legislation to restore the tribe. Those good-hearted legislatures, with mostly Democrats, were attacked by the gaming tribes of California. They threatened these legislators with the withholding of any funding for their campaigns if they supported the restoration of the Muecma tribe. So there is this other kind of internecine warfare going on. So they had to pull back. They were threatened with the degree where these tribes are saying that the state of California has no authority to support the restoration of a tribe, which isn't true. But with their lawyers and their power brokerage, this is the new age of Indian gaming, which, by the way, comes in 1988. Please, you're thinking.
Yeah. Well, determining what would be just.
Good
It
question.
just seems almost impossible given the horrific history of corruption and just evil. I can get my brain around, I can understand what the internecine, as you said, conflict would be between recognized tribes who have gaming rights. And I can understand why they might object to another tribe getting recognition just from the competition. I get that. Don't know what to do about it. I get it. What I'm wondering is, are there any other issues where another tribe or group of indigenous people would be affected negatively by the Muwekma getting their recognition?
It's a good question.
It's Kathy's.
Well, I mean,
Kathy helped me with that. Yeah.
it's a question because concerned about what are these particular outcomes that could be adverse.
Right. Like, are there any other groupings that somehow lose rights or lose potential claims to territory or anything like that if the Muwekma get their recognition the way they want?
So one has to start with how do you lay out the evidence as to who you are. I've been involved in Indian affairs since '71. California is unique because I, who have no Native American blood, can claim to be an Ohlone Indian. And I can create a nonprofit and I can tell the Heritage Commission I want to be on their contact list and most likely descendant list, which is what non-Indians have done in the past at the behest of archaeologists. So when you say corrupt, yeah, there's a lot of corruption. So when I got involved with the tribe, they basically said, whatever the evidence leads to, we don't want you to create fictitious stuff. So we took the most conservative route in doing the research, and we were able to pull them back to their Aboriginal villages through the mission records. And we were able to demonstrate their continuous existence decade by decade, we had to start at 1900 with the two 1900 censuses from Pleasanton and Niles, the Kelsey census, the 1910 Indian census of Indiantown at Pleasanton, and then their correspondences with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, where they're slated for land purchase, then their placement under the Reno Agency and the Sacramento Agency, and their enrollments. So it's not one family. It's not an individual. It's a series of surviving lineages that comprise the historic Verona Band of Alameda County that was federally recognized. So the other question to reverse that is, how does it adversely affect legitimate tribes when you have either individuals who are eligible to enroll in either Muwekma tribe or Ama Mutsun tribe, or individuals who claim to be Ohlone Indians, but when we've done their genealogy, we've turned out that they're not only not Ohlone Indians, they're not California Indians at all, claiming to be Ohlone Indians, but validated by the state California Heritage Commission. So it's really inverse, that you have individuals who are like Karina Gould from Sequoia Tay that want to harm. There are over 615 enrolled Muwekmas, including her immediate family, enrolled in the tribe. So how does her family, or how does she, as an individual, have the right to overthrow a documented tribe that includes her lineage and the fact that she decided not to enroll? In 2005, she came to the Muwekmas and she asked Rosemary, the chairwoman, for us to provide her lineage. She did not even know her lineage was. She knew she was a Guzman. Rosemary told me to provide from the archives of the tribe her genealogy, going all the way back when the ancestors were first missionized into Mission San Jose and Mission San Francisco. We provided that. So rather than a thank you, she goes on to a particular mode to undermine the rights of the Muwekma tribe. She's against federal recognition. And what federal recognition does, I'll give you an example. When I started out with the tribe, I had my students go out throughout the Bay Area to go to nonprofits that were teaching about Ohlone culture or whatever. And I asked them to collect any of the information they provided for teachers and kind of information about their curriculum, and then asked them how they were going to involve members of the Ohlone tribe. Invariably, the answer was, we don't need the tribe to teach about the Ohlonies, even though a lot what they were teaching about was fiction. Malcolm Margolin wrote his nice book called The Ohlone Way in 1978. He never interviewed any of the families.
Hmm.
It is a fictitious book. It is not an ethnography. He has them as simple hunters and gatherers living on their mortuary mounds when they had a morbid fear of the dead. And when he had the opportunity, when he met with the chairwoman of the tribe, to rewrite and co-author with the tribe an updated version of Ohlone Way, he said, why change something when it already makes money? It was East Bay Regional Parks District that basically funded his work for the Ohlone Way. We had published through California History and a site in downtown San Jose, Tamian Station, a ethnohistory on the tribe called the Contemporary Native American Revitalization Movement. We originally did that in 1992. We then published that as a separate little booklet. And people would say, well, the answer to the tribe's issues is education. It's very nice. So when we wanted to deposit the little booklets with that article in it for free at Coyote Hills, East Bay Regional Park District, they said, no, you can't have any of those here. The only book people need to know about is Malcolm Margolin's Ohlone Way. So avenues of education, you have to understand, when we talk about these particular systems, they're colonial systems. And the politics of erasure and marginalization is normative. And it, people don't mean any ill will for the most part. They're not premeditatedly saying, well, if we do this, we can stop the tribe. But this is how things are, principally because people don't know. And it may be not excusable, but it is explainable. If people don't know, we can only have reasonable expectations on how to do exactly what we're doing today, is to help formulate strategies. So to answer the question about who will be harmed, no one. The tribe has supported other tribes. They paid for the Ama Mutsun to organize. They got the Ama Mutsun involved in archaeology in their own territory, south of Morgan Hill to Gilroy. We did Cheetahtock Adams school site for Santa Clara County Parks, which was a location of a schoolhouse that burnt down, and it was a garbage dump overlooking Yagas Creek. And it was a major archaeological site. So we volunteered our time to do both the excavations of the burials in the parking lot, and then also the interpretation program for Santa Clara County Parks. We worked with Pleasanton, this museum on Main, and they invited other representatives to participate. Karina Gould was one of them, and she would not allow us to present any information. When Berkeley Unified School District asked the tribe to rename some of their schools, we came up with names like Huchun, which was the Aboriginal tribe of the area. Then we get an email back from Berkeley School District. Karina Gould has protested the fact that Muwekma should be allowed to rename 2 or 3 schools. When we did a major exhibit up in Oakland Museum back in 2014, it was called Above and Below the Bay, one of the best major exhibitions about the Bay Area possible. People inside fought tooth and nail against Karina Gould to allow us to do the interpretation of the Emeryville Mound. And so we worked collectively to do this magnificent murals and interpretation of the Emeryville Mortuary Mound, which is not a shell mound. Okay? And at the end, we had 100 people talking about the exhibitions. They praised the Emeryville Muwekma section of it. And when they published the summary of the exhibition, they would not publish the Muwekma tribe's website. We also asked them directly that we say, okay, you omitted the tribe here, and we have one little case in the California room to do the history and heritage of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, the Verona Band of Alameda County, and they wouldn't answer. And to this day, they still won't answer. And that ties in with Phoebe Apperson-Hurst and Berkeley. So these are the kinds of walls, if you will, that are thrown up. But the tribe, rather than being bitter, they decide, got to move along. Can't wallow in bitterness. You've got to formulate alternative strategies to continue tell the message. And going back to the truth ride, they're hoping to meet with Deb Haaland, who's the Secretary of Interior at in DC, and they're getting support from tribes around the country, and other people as well. They're supporting it. They're writing the congressional representatives. And let me throw one more in there on this one. In 1989 was the Base Closure Act, okay, under Clinton. And the San Francisco Presidio was going to be closed from the US Army. And they were going to transfer the land to the Presidio Trust. From the National Park Service, her name was Griffin, she had just thrown the Yosemite Miwoks out of the park up at Yosemite. And she came down to the San Francisco Presidio and basically helped them write the environmental impact report for the transfer. And it was written as a creation story that in 1769, the world was created and the Spanish were the first group of people to come into the Bay Area. And shrouded through the mists of time were these obscure Native Americans. So when we challenged them and said, this is a creation story, and Muwekma has legitimate claims because landless tribes have first right of refusal under federal surplus land. And there was a circular that went around from the military saying, don't inform tribes of their rights. So the Muwekma said, we do not refuse part of the San Francisco Presidio. So the Presidio Trust flew out their chief anthropologist, Dr. David Van Horn from Colorado, and he interviewed the Muwekmas, and he saw all the primary documentation. And he put together a memorandum of agreement that governs the laws and statutes for the Federal Park Service and their interface with tribes. And he says this will now be included in the final report. When we got the final report, it wasn't there. And I talked to my colleague, Roger Kelly, who is a National Park Service archaeologist. What happened? And he said, just like the 18 unratified treaties of California were suppressed into secrecy, the National Park Service suppressed the MOU into secrecy as well.
Mm. Mm.
That was in the 1990s.
So this is really good. We're getting to I think past the end of our time, but I know Kathy has a question that I know she wants to have answered.
Please.
So what happened to the 135 tribes that identified along with the Muwekma and Amanutsan?
What happened to those tribes?
Now is that right, Kathy? Yeah.
Yeah, the majority of them remain landless. And so we picked up on it during the ACCIP hearings in the 1990s. And we invited people who could demonstrate that they had relations affiliated with the tribes of 1927 via the 1928-32 enrollments and other documentation. I would help put that together with them. Very few were able to make that linkage. So we don't really know what happened to those tribes. They were casualties.
Well, I keep waiting for this to turn hopeful, but so far we haven't gotten to that point. We are at the end of the time that we have set for you, Alan, but I am just completely astounded at the extraordinary base of knowledge that you have and your generosity in sharing all of that and your ability to come up with these names and dates and places off the top of your head. I have no idea how you do that. I'm wondering, are you open to further conversation, or do you do speaking engagements or anything?
Okay, so the answer is yes and yes. I have recently done over Zoom a PowerPoint presentation on the history and heritage of the Muwekma tribe for the Santa Clara Historical Heritage Commission and other groups up in Contra Costa County.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is yes. If there's a wider audience, as you can see, it's like even without the 8 cups of coffee, I'm full of babble, and glad you're recording this. But there's other documentation and information I can also send that can be shared.
Mm-hmm.
I know it could be overwhelming, but the answer is yes. I'm more than happy. That's my essential role in the administration with the tribe, is to provide, the thing about when we were starting out, and the question was that because the tribe was not federally recognized by various municipalities, county, state, and federal entities, they were not only viewed with suspect, they were viewed with contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's taken us, 44 years to get to a point where we can have a civil conversation with people, even though it's somewhat one-sided on my behalf. But yes, so that's my role with the tribe. Now that I'm retired from San Jose State University, I have a little more time than before. And sometimes I do it in person when I'm back in the Bay Area. I still have my residence in downtown San Jose. But yes, I'm at your beck and call. And, the tribe tries to honor entities and churches by writing up these Muwekma greetings to kind of provide foundational information for those that are interested in combing through a lot of the detail. And we even have more comprehensive ethnohistories. that we've published.
Well, well, thank you for all of that. I'm quite certain that we would like to engage you some more as we're just um, coming into our own what we hope is a role of support and advocacy to try and bring this up to a greater sense of awareness and public recognition. But of course, all of that is dependent upon understanding the truth. And you seem to be um, in good supply of that truth.
Yeah.
So much gratitude. Um,
Yes.
and I think Barbara knows how to reach you.
Yeah.
So just today, our incredible gratitude for
Yeah.
all of your dedication and help in bringing us up to speed.
Yeah. So Kathy had a question she put in the chat. You want to ask it, Kathy?
I was just wondering if the recognition is dependent on claiming recognition in all 23 counties. I mean, is that part of the recognition?
Yep. It's
No.
recognition is basically through either an administrative process. All we wanted the Bureau of Indian Affairs to do is to look at and weigh the evidence. And they lied to the federal courts after the tribe was declined to have it extended back to them, their recognition, that only one piece of evidence was submitted between 1927 and 1985, only one piece.
Hmm.
And the court said, well, you only have one piece of evidence. And yet we said the Bureau of Indian Affairs enrollments that were approved by the Secretary of Interior and the federal courts should be considered evidence, or the fact that they went to Indian boarding school. Did I send you the military history, do you recall,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the tribe? You got that? Yeah, I'm always updating that one. The other problem here was Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein, when she was alive, was voraciously anti-Indian. I know, it's surprising, because she's always viewed as a progressive Democrat. She was voraciously anti-Indian. And when the Bureau of Indian Affairs, some years ago, wanted to revise the federal regulations and the guidelines so that tribes like Muwekma that were denied can be reconsidered with fresh eyes and evaluating based upon that evidence, she threatened to withhold funding to the Bureau of Indian Affairs if they allowed that to happen. And when the tribe went after the part of the San Francisco Presidio, remember, she and her husband purchased a $65 million house right up against the Presidio. She didn't want no Indians there. And we even proposed to do a Native American museum there back in 1989. That would benefit the public, that we would do both California Indians and relocated Indians.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
these are the kinds of dynamics, like I said, nobody sees. And then more recently, the congressional delegation, Zoe Lofgren, for example, used to be a strong proponent when she was supervisor and congressional representative in her district, supporting on the House floor in 2002, strenuously supporting the Muwekma tribe. Then they asked her for the tribe for $60,000 for her campaign. Well, the tribe said, we don't have any money. And so they offered to allow the tribe to become restored with one provision. The provision was they had to give up their sovereignty. They would not be allowed to do any economic development, not just gaming, any businesses whatsoever to become self-sustaining. And under the equal treatment under the law, tribes have fought against that kind of consideration, but tribes are treated differently. So people argue, well, this tribe is greedy. All they want is, and they just came out of nowhere, the Muwekmas, and yet you know about the Ohlone Cemetery and the Ohlone College, where I used to teach at, by the way, Ohlone College. But in 1962, the diocese in Oakland was selling off the cemetery with 4,000 Indian burials there, including within living memory family members that died in the early 20th century. Anyway, so they linked together with the American Indian Historical Society in San Francisco and were able to secure title to the cemetery by 1971, when the Historical Society transferred the cemetery over. And all of the Galvans, except for Andy Galvan and previously his dad, all of that family, the descendants of Dolores Marine Galvan, are enrolled in the Muwek-Maloney tribe. Anyway, so that's,
Okay.
the story just goes on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know we're going to have more questions. I'll send you more.
Please do.
I'll send you some questions ahead of time, just so that we can.
Yes, and bang down the door whenever you want.
Okay.
You're
Thank
not
you.
bothering me.
Thank you for your time and your generosity of spending time with us and educating us. And you will be hearing from us again. So
Thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate your patience with me.
Okay.
So, blessings to you guys and have a good one.
Mr. Leventhal, I just want to let you know that Reverend Greg said that he really appreciated the conversation, but he had to go to another event, so
Understood.
he had to sign off. So
I'm not offended at all.
okay. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys.
So I guess we'll talk at the next ARO meeting.
Okay. Bye.